Good evening and welcome to What the Friday. Now, I'm still feeling a little poorly. I'm starting to come around some from this COVID, but I feel like just laying around in bed is not making a whole lot of progress. So I decided to get back into the routine of things with the podcast, and hopefully that will at least raise my spirits. Now, I'm not going to lie, y'all. I've been laying around feeling sorry for myself over the past week or so.
So, she's going to be doing it, but sitting up this time.
So, yeah, like Alex said, I'm sitting up feeling sorry for myself. But anyway, yeah, I guess you already guessed it. Alex is with us tonight. So, it's been forever since he has been, like, seriously, he hasn't been on an episode in several months.
A year.
Now, it's no big secret that Alex and I are big wrestling fans. I've been a wrestling fan for as long as I can remember. And my daddy, when I was little, used to take me to Mid-Atlantic matches on Monday nights at the old Greenville Memorial Auditorium. And I was probably 5 years old, maybe. And I have loved it since then. And that love of wrestling has passed over to Alex. He probably knows more about wrestling than I do these days. So, but you're probably wondering, what in the world wrestling has to do with this podcast? Well, I'm going to tell you, my friends, murder showed its ugly face in the wrestling world in 2007, taking out 3 members of a prominent wrestling family, and one of them was the murderer.
Welcome to What the Friday, an After Dark series presented by Mystery, Murder, and Magic. Listener discretion is advised.
Good evening. Tonight, this arena here in Corpus Christi, Texas, was to have been filled to capacity with enthusiastic WWE fans. Tonight's storyline was to have been the alleged demise of my character, Mr. McMahon. However, in reality, WWE superstar Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their son Daniel are dead.
Those are the words that were spoken at the beginning of the Monday Night Raw episode on June 25th, 2007. Now, I can remember feeling so shocked. I had so many questions. I was like, what could have happened? I thought maybe, because they didn't give a lot of details. I mean, could it have been a car wreck or maybe a robbery gone wrong? But I can remember that episode was very emotional, and his fellow wrestlers were speaking and sometimes even crying and talking about what a great person Chris had been. And that's just how we all knew him, just even from what we knew of him on television. Now, those were back in the days of MySpace, and I can remember when Raw went off that night, getting on MySpace, and post after post was just about the passing of Chris Benoit and his family. Nobody could wrap their heads around it. It was just one of those things that we were so confused about what had happened. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, it wouldn't be long before we did find out what had really happened in the Benoit home over the course of the 3 days before that particular episode of Raw. Now, before we get into all of those details, I want to go back a few years to the late 1990s. Now, Benoit had previously been a wrestler with New Japan and WCW before making it over to WWE. He worked his way up through those promotions with great determination. He had a very strong work ethic, and many of his colleagues looked up to him because of that. Now, when he was just a little boy, his dad took him to his very first wrestling match where he saw the Dynamite Kid. And it was there that he decided that he wanted to be a wrestler when he grew up. And he actually made it happen. He was this very disciplined person in his pursuit of his wrestling career. And if he thought that he had messed up during a match, he punished himself. Now, through it all, he had made a best friend back when he started in New Japan. and that best friend was Eddie Guerrero. Now, it was during his career at WCW that Chris met his wife, Nancy. Now, at the time, Nancy was married to another wrestler named Kevin Sullivan. And Sullivan had written a storyline that had Nancy, who was Sullivan's manager on the show, as well as his real-life wife. But the storyline was her having an affair with Chris Benoit. Well, the Nancy that I'm talking about, you may remember her as Fallen Angel when she was representing Kevin Sullivan, and later she would be known as Woman. Now, it was just supposed to only be a wrestling storyline, but Nancy and Chris ended up spending so much time together that the two actually fell in love. Well, naturally, this caused issues between Kevin and Nancy, and there have been allegations of some abuse in that relationship, with Kevin being the aggressor. Now, that aggression carried over into the ring, because at a WCW pay-per-view that was called Bash at the Beach, Benoit and Sullivan had a match, and at some point it turned into a real brawl, and Benoit ended up busting Kevin Sullivan's eardrum. It got pretty ugly. Now, when Sullivan was asked about those domestic abuse allegations, he denied it, and he said that never happened. But in February of 2000, Nancy gave birth to the one and only child that she had with Chris Benoit, and they named him Daniel. Well, of course, by then she had already left Kevin Sullivan, but later that year, let's see, Daniel was born, I think, in February, and then in November of that same year, Nancy and Chris got married, and little Daniel was their best man at their wedding. Now, you know, every marriage has its problems, but apparently the Benoits had a lot of problems, because in 2003, she actually filed for divorce, and she requested a restraining order against Chris Benoit after citing cruel treatment. And she later dropped the divorce and the restraining order, and it appeared that they had worked out their differences and everybody thought everything was okay. Well, fast forward a couple of years to November of 2005, and Chris's best friend Eddie Guerrero passed away from heart disease at the age of 38. Now, this affected Benoit deeply, and many of his fellow wrestlers say that from that point, Benoit became a hermit. Now, he didn't want to hang out with anybody. He just kind of kept to himself. But at the same time, he didn't really take the proper time to grieve over the loss of his friend either. Because after the funeral, WWE had some big shows in Europe, and they all loaded up, Chris with them, and flew over to Europe. And like I said, Chris was with him, and so he just didn't really take any time off. And I guess he kept it all into himself, and I'm sure that was not really good for him. Now, besides being withdrawn, he became very paranoid. He would take different routes to familiar places, and he would drive different cars. He was so sure, from what others have said, he was so sure that somebody was after him, or maybe it was just a paranoia that he had built up in his head. But none of it made sense to his family, because, they saw no reason for him to be paranoid. But, he just wouldn't open up to him and tell him what was going on inside of him. Well, Benoit had been scheduled to wrestle 2 shows for the WWE, and this was in Texas, but he failed to show up for either of them. Now, he also has a good friend named Chavo Guerrero. And Chavo said that over that weekend, he had talked to Chris several times. Now, Chris had said that Nancy and Daniel had food poisoning, and in the course of taking care of them, he missed his first flight to Houston, Texas, but he assured Chavo that he would catch the next flight. Well, that never happened. Sometime during that weekend, Chris had also sent text messages to other wrestlers and a referee from his and Nancy's phones, but by Sunday, nobody in the WWE had heard from Chris. So the WWE officials called the Fayette County, Georgia Sheriff's Department, and they asked for them to do a welfare check, just to go make sure that the family was okay. And Cheddar has decided to join us. He opened the door and came right on in. But anyway, yeah, Cheddar's here. But anyways, so the WWE, they called, that sheriff's office, and they're like, can you go check on the family? We haven't heard anything from them. Well, once deputies got to the home and started doing a search, they located the 3 bodies of Chris, Nancy, and Daniel. And after autopsies and the initial investigations were performed, the case was declared a double homicide/suicide case. Now, there's much more to it than that. The day after Raw, which was June 26th, a news conference with information of what they believed happened was held. And you have to remember that this is less than 24 hours after Vince McMahon had dedicated the entire episode of Raw to Chris Benoit. And I can remember feeling angry after I heard all the details that had came out. I mean, why would a father do this to their child? And how could a husband do this to his wife? And what in the hell could have happened to cause any of it? And as you can imagine, the WWE had to have their say on the matter too.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show, recognizing the career of Chris Benoit. However, now some 26 hours later, the facts of this horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name tonight. On the contrary, tonight's show will be dedicated to everyone who has been affected by this terrible incident. This evening marks the first step of the healing process. Tonight, WWE performers will do what they do better than anyone else in the world: entertain you.
Now, once the details started to emerge, the evidence against a very much loved, very popular, and very talented wrestler couldn't be denied. It was revealed that on that Friday, the family had barbecued by the pool. And later that evening, something just went very, very wrong. Chris restrained Nancy with duct tape, and then he proceeded to strangle her with a phone cord. Now, it's believed that he had been drinking because there was a fair amount of beer cans that were found in the home. The next morning, Benoit gave little Daniel Xanax, and then he suffocated him in his room. Now, it should also be noted that a large kitchen knife was found on the floor under Daniel's bed. But now Bibles had been placed by both the body of Daniel and Nancy. And it was at that point that Chris called several friends and let him know that both Nancy and Daniel were sick and that he had been taking care of them. Well, that Saturday night, Chris went to bed with the dead bodies of his wife and child still in his home. On Sunday, Benoit did a couple of web searches on the internet that are very chilling. One search was for the Bible story of the prophet Elijah and the resurrection of a dead boy in the Old Testament. The other search was for the quickest and most painless way to break your own neck. After those web searches, Chris went to his home gym, taking with him a half-drunken bottle of wine, And once he was there, he took the pull-down bar off of his lat machine. He wrapped a towel around his neck. Then he wrapped the metal cord from the lat machine, which I believe had been attached to that pull-down bar. But he wrapped that around his neck also. And then he adjusted the weights on that machine to 240 pounds. And then he released the weights. And when he released it, it instantly killed him. From that point forward, it was like Benoit had never existed in the WWE world. Every mention of him had been erased. Wrestlers were told not to mention him. He was basically deleted from everything that had anything to do with the WWE. Now, if you search on YouTube, you can still find some of his matches that he had in the past, but you won't find anything about him on the company's website. Now, Alex, I've been thinking about this since I started writing this episode and doing the research for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I've got some thoughts. And like I said, this is just my thoughts, opinions, whatever. Now, yes, Benoit was a murderer, but Jimmy Snuka was also charged 30 years after the death of his then girlfriend, Nancy Argentino. Now, he never stood trial for it, but the circumstances surrounding Argentino's death led the forensic pathologist who performed her autopsy to rule it as a homicide. But Snuka's still on the company website. Like, none of that ever even happened. And don't get me wrong, I don't have an issue with it. I'm just saying that to me, it's weird that the day after they had paid tribute to Benoit, he pretty much never existed in the WWE's eyes. And Alex, you want to know why I think that is? And like I said, this is really just strictly my opinion on this, but I've often heard that the wellness policy in that company is a joke. And it's often been said that Benoit did steroids back in the day and he was on testosterone. Now, I feel like they had let him slide by with that, and then when he killed his family and himself, maybe they felt some degree of responsibility, so they just acted like he had never been one of their superstars. Now, that's not an accusation or allegation or anything of the sort. It's just a random thought, theory, whatever, that I had during my research of this episode. And I'll get off my soapbox, but, you know, maybe that's just something for a whole another episode, but you just can't erase history. You know, I mean, it happened. But like I said, I'm getting off my soapbox. Like, there's so much. This whole story just hurts my heart really bad. But anyway, in July of 2007, a WWE attorney named Jerry McDevitt, he was interviewed on the television show Live with Dan Abrams. And you might know Dan Abrams from Live PD. He was one of the hosts of it. But anyway, on that show, that attorney claimed that Benoit had been given testosterone as part of testosterone replacement therapy, and he went on to say that that's something that they commonly do for those who suffered testicular damage from using steroids in the past. Now, others claim that Benoit has suffered so many concussions over the years, and that had taken its toll on Benoit's brain. And I'm not saying it didn't, because post-mortem tests were done on Benoit's brain at West Virginia University by the head of their neurosurgery department. I think his name was Julian Bales. And it was found that Benoit's brain had been so severely damaged. Y'all, I keep thinking about this, and I can't even wrap my head around it. But his brain had been so severely damaged, it resembled that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer patient's brain. Okay? Let that sink in. Chris was 40 when he died, but his brain resembled an 85-year-old's with Alzheimer's brain. Okay? those chair shots, are just, after a while, or probably not even after a while. But anyway, now, his brain had damage to all 4 lobes and the brain stem. And it was also found that he did suffer from severe chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And we're just, from here forward, we'll call that CTE. But his own father believes that the brain damage that Benoit suffered from led to the double murder homicide. But WWE said that idea was just speculation. To me, again, they were dodging any responsibility, which, I wouldn't say they were directly responsible, but I guess they just didn't want to make it look like they could have somehow prevented it. But anyway, and of course, during the course of all of this, that word that they threw around a lot was roid rage. They thought maybe that he had started using steroids again, other than the testosterone, and it had hyped him up and put him into that rage that led to him killing his wife and his son and then killing himself. But there's also been conspiracy theories surrounding what happened that weekend in June of 2007. One theory suggested by journalist Bill Apter is that Benoit had gotten into some sort of trouble with somebody. Nobody knows what kind of trouble. Sorry, y'all, I still got a sore throat. But nobody knew what kind of trouble and who it was he was in trouble with. But when he came home that day, Nancy and little Daniel were already dead. And if that had been a professional mob hit, they could have easily made it look like Benoit killed his wife and son and then killed himself. And I guess that's entirely possible, but Apter's main reason, though, for believing this theory is that he doesn't think that Benoit would have ever hurt Daniel like that. And he went on to say that sure, husbands and wives kill each other sometimes, but Chris wouldn't have hurt that little boy. And even Chris Jericho has said that situation's shady. And then there's the fact that a suicide note wasn't found at the scene. But I guess I should clarify that last statement. During the initial investigation, there wasn't a suicide note found. A suicide note wouldn't be found until later and not at the crime scene. A box of Chris's belongings were sent to his first wife, Martina, and he had 2 kids with Martina. I believe it was a son and a daughter. I know at least one son. Now, within that box of belongings, a Bible was found, and inside that Bible there was a notation written by Benoit that said, "I am preparing to leave this earth." Now, was that a suicide note? Who knows? It could have been just some kind of notation, but it's been long believed that was his suicide note. Now, I have to admit that I wanted, and I still want to be angry with Chris Benoit for what happened. It was a heinous crime that he committed. He took the lives of his wife and his child, but I can't be angry. I'm just mostly sad that the entire thing took place. Because one minute I'm feeling like he should have known better. And then I think about the medical evidence presented about his brain and wonder how he even functioned. But I think my biggest issue is that when something like this happens, we need to blame somebody. We need to hold somebody accountable. And sure, Chris Benoit, y'all, I am so sorry. Chris Benoit did carry out these crimes. It's pretty clear what happened. But it's also clear that the man was suffering. And none of us really knew about that until it was too late. But no matter what caused Chris Benoit to do what he did, one fact remains. And that's the fact that these wrestlers and even other athletes are putting their well-being on the line to entertain us. Now, I'm not going to say they should stop because I can't imagine a world without wrestling. But concussions need to be taken seriously. From like the pee-wee sport levels on up to like pro, sports. I can't stop thinking about Benoit's brain resume. I said it earlier, but I keep thinking about how a 40-year-old man's brain would resemble an 85-year-old Alzheimer patient's brain. I just can't wrap my head around that. Now, I don't really have anything else to add to this. Now, Alex, I want to hear your thoughts. So you've been sitting over there pretty quiet. Now, all of this happened before you were old enough to know what was even what was happening. But like I said, you've seen probably YouTube videos. I saw different TV shows and stuff.
This was back in 2007 before I started watching. I started out after that year. In the show that I shown you before, Dark Side of the Ring, that's when I really knew about. Like, I knew about it already. I didn't know what fully happened to it, but I watched that episode of Dark Side of the Ring, and that's when I learned all about it. But
I do have to say that Dark Side of the Ring shed a lot of light on some stuff that wasn't brought out before. I mean, this happened going on 15 years ago, and God, 15 years ago.
That's crazy.
But I mean, we only were given like facts from police and doctors and stuff like that, but at least on Dark Side of the Ring they talked with family members and different wrestlers. Just it gave us more perspectives of what actually went on with Benoit, and he wasn't just somebody that came in and killed his wife and kid. There was a lot of facts that led up to what happened. I mean, it's not an excuse whatsoever, but it's just one of those sad things that has happened in our lifetimes. And I don't know, it just for it to get swept under the rug like it did by that one company just makes me think less of that company. But I don't know. I don't want to say too much that's going to be like, she said this, but I mean, I just feel like they could have went about things a different way. That's all I'm going to say. But, Alex, do you think that maybe it was the damage he had to his brain that caused all this to happen? Or do you think he just went nuts? Maybe he was drunk? Or do you think that he didn't even do it? Maybe somebody made it look like he did it. What do you think?
There's a lot of stuff that could have led to it happening, but I personally don't know what could have done what to that situation, to be honest, because there's so many possible outcomes that happened.
Yeah, and there's so many reasons that it could have happened. And I always thought he was like a really cool guy. I didn't know him personally, of course, but I just always thought he was a really nice guy, and I never would have pictured him to be like that. I mean, you really don't know somebody off of other than what they portray themselves as, like, on TV. But I just never would have thought something like that would have happened. But anyway, Alex, you got anything else to add?
Got nothing.
All right. Well, I guess that's going to be it for today. We're sorry we took like a week off. But we've got the corona. And we're starting to get better. But it's supposed to start snowing in a little while, Alex.
We can't go out there though.
I know. We just gotta look out the window.
You look at the window and look at it.
We'll look out the window and watch the snowflakes if it happens.
If it happens.
You know how it is in Whitmire. Yes. We never get anything. But anyway, thanks for listening. Y'all come back. I'm going to try to put one out for tomorrow morning for the Weekend Weird Files. And we'll definitely have a new episode on Monday. Y'all have a good rest of your weekend.